I got to talk to you about homeschool. I am 100% in support of homeschool, by the way. Why should parents homeschool their children? And for those parents who do want to do it, but let's say they're not married, the mother got to go to work, what would you recommend for them? How should they get involved in a homeschool program? What should they do? And why are you so in support of homeschooling?
Yeah, the government school system has been an operating wing of the Democratic Party for generations now. I went to the government school, and it was bad then. It's far worse now. It's the kind of thing that has rapidly devolved.
Yeah.
For the past 3 or 4 generations. Parents, Christian parents specifically, but I would even say if you're not a Christian, there is no reason why you should be sending your children to public school if there's any possible way that you can avoid it. The people who teach in public schools, not in every single case, but in most cases, are seeking to usurp your authority as a parent. They are seeking to undermine and subvert your authority as a parent. And most parents, even if they're not that involved or they're not that locked in as a parent, don't want to send their children off to an institution that is going to actively undermine their authority. But that's what government education does. 18,000 hours, I believe, is the number from kindergarten through 12th grade that you are giving your children over to Caesar to basically say, reform this person into a model citizen of our society. And when Caesar is done with them, they are usually unrecognizable from the family they came from. Yeah. And so that is why I'm an enormous believer in homeschooling, or one of the things that we've been working on here in the past 3 years has been a classical Christian school that is it's a heavily parent emphasized classical Christian school, because we know that the commands of Scripture to raise your children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, that's what we are called to do. And specifically, fathers are called, don't provoke your children, raise them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. That is an all-encompassing project where they need to think like a Christian, act like a Christian, walk like a Christian, talk like a Christian. And you can't do that. You cannot obey a command like that if you are outsourcing your parental authority to a public school 35 to 40 hours a week. That is why it's so critical that parents take back the education of their children.
Which is better, a good private school or homeschooling?
You know, it depends on the age of the student. It depends on whether it's a boy or a girl. It depends on the quality of the private institution that's available. One of the things that caused us to want to work towards this classical Christian education world was because I have sons, and I don't want the only teacher my son to ever have is his mother. Yes. I want him to learn from other men. Yeah. I want him to learn from other men who are excellent in their craft, and know not only their Bibles well, but know their craft well. And so for boys, as they get older, I would say probably if you have the right school situation, it's much more important that you get your boys into the competitive environment of a day school. For girls, I think it's more, oftentimes is a very good thing for you to keep their hearts at home as much as possible. Yeah. And some of the ways you can do that is by homeschooling them, because when you are homeschooling them in the home, you are teaching them to love the things of the home. Now, that being said, I have daughters at a classical Christian school as well, but that's something to consider as well.
Right on. What's the most difficult thing about homeschooling?
One of the most difficult things, especially, is if you have a lot of kids, you're going to be stretched pretty thin. Right. And so even if you don't do a day school ever, make sure you get yourself involved in a community where you can share some resources, share some expertise, because as your kids get older, they are going to outpace you in the things that they need to learn, things that you have forgotten, or maybe you never learned yourself. And so that's definitely going to be one of the most difficult things, is just simply being stretched so thin.
Your school is called the Christ the King Academy, right?
That's correct,
Is
yes.
that nationwide?
It's a part of the Association of Classical Christian Schools, the ACCS, and ACCS is nationwide. Our version of ACCS, Christ the King Academy, is specific to our own community.
And for those parents who like to put their children to homeschooling, how can they find you? How do they find a school in their area?
Yeah, so the ACCS website is going to be the best way of finding that. Just Google search Association of Classical Christian Schools. I believe their URL is classicalchristian.org. But if you Google it, you'll find it.
Amazing. And the reason I asked too, because as I said, I'm not for the public school at all, but I talked to several mothers now who don't have husbands and things like that.
Yep.
And they would love to put their children in a public school, whatever school. What do you call it?
It's a classical Christian school.
Right. But they they don't know how to find it, and they are not able to educate the children themselves. So they want to find some kind of way to get involved, but they don't quite understand. So I'm glad you, and I'll let you give that out even more so in a minute here. That's amazing. At one time, Catholic schools used to be good educated schools. I hear that has changed. Are you aware of that? Is that true or not?
It absolutely it is true. I'm sure there's good Catholic schools out there, but a lot of what we're doing as classical Christian institutions is what the Catholics used to do, and what often most of Western civilization has done. So what the classical method really is a method of reclamation, basically. We're looking not to do new things, but to put new feet on those old paths that our forefathers had been doing for generations before us. And that was certainly true of the Catholic schools.
Yeah.
And if they want to regain some of the influence that they had back then, they'll return to those as well.
Which is better, a homeschooling or Christian school?
You know, one of the things you have to be careful for when you're considering a Christian school is the Christian school just a private school where they allow for prayer, but for all intents and purposes, it's actually just a public school light? If that's the case, that probably is a much better option than the government school itself, but it might not be worth the time or the money. There are all sorts of reasons why a lot of private education or private Christian education institutions in the U.S. are not necessarily strong places to send your children.
Right.
You have to look at track records. Jesus says that wisdom is justified by her children. And so what kind of graduates are these schools putting out? I would look at that. I would look at what kind of culture the private school or the Christian school exemplifies. If they have a diversity, equity, and inclusion board, do not put your kids in that school because you're just getting public school light.
Absolutely.